Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. Today I'm doing a wrap up for the last few books that I've read. As usual, I'm going to start from the ones I like the least and then up to the ones I enjoyed the most. So let's jump straight in. The first one is Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. This book is all set in Harlem in the 50s and 60s and follows a main character called Carney, who he's a furniture salesman and a family man and has this very acceptable front, but at the same time can't really help but being involved in some unsavory activities following in his father's footsteps. So this is a crime noir novel. I had fairly high expectations given how popular and beloved Colson Whitehead is, and he's a Pulitzer Prize winning author. His writing definitely stands out as really masterful. However, I have to say that the plot of the book wasn't quite as gripping as I was expecting or hoping, and the characters fell somewhat flat for me as well. So I have a full review for this that you can go watch if you want to know more about the book, but I ended up only rating this 5 out of 10. Moving on, I have Best Served Call by Joe Abercrombie, which is the fourth book in the First Law universe. So this is not technically a sequel to the trilogy, it's more of a standalone. However, there is some overlap with characters as well. Some of the secondary characters from the original trilogy appear in the standalone book. There's quite a lot of things that Abercrombie got right. First of all, he's always masterful and on point writing, again, is really consistent in this book. However, I have to admit that my pretty high expectations were not quite met because I didn't find this one as compelling as the original trilogy, even though this was sold to me by so many people as their favorite book and definitely better than the trilogy. That was not quite my experience. In the original trilogy, we still follow some despicable characters, but you can't help but still like them somewhat because of the humor, because of some of the traits of their character. And in Best Served Cold, I didn't really found myself warming to the main characters of the story. I really liked some of the secondary characters, but that wasn't really enough. And also the pacing I thought was a bit uneven, as in some of the plot was slightly repetitive in the middle of the book, which again dragged a little bit for me. So I ended up rating this 6 out of 10. And again, I have a full review if you're interested. The next one is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. This is a really famous staple of Italian literature, and it sold more than 50 million copies over the years, with a movie with Sean Connery made after it. And essentially it follows two monks that are visiting a monastery in northern Italy in the 14th century, and there's a suicide happening in this monastery, and the two monks are called to investigate. It's a very Sherlock Holmes-esque sort of setting, and Eco admits himself that that's a strong influence in his writing. But also there's a really heavy-handed disquisitions about the political and religious disputes at the time. So it's a sort of higher brow, sort of historical fiction book than others, insofar that you really need to be prepared to endure some of these fairly long descriptions of what these issues were in terms of the heretical movements at the time, or the theological debates around the poverty of Jesus, that sort of thing, that are not necessarily weaved into the story, but they're almost like kept as two separate books, a mystery novel and more of a essay around these issues that sort of go alongside each other. So it might not be for everyone, I have to say, but I found myself quite enjoying the book, and to some extent, even some of these breaks from the main plot that Eco constantly takes, I didn't find as annoying as I initially thought I might. So I ended up rating this 8 out of 10, and for this one I have a review on the channel as well. And then I have another historical fiction book, and that's Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. This is the second book in the Thomas Cromwell trilogy. I read Wolf Hall a few months ago, and I have to say that this didn't really let me down. I very much enjoyed the first one, and I still love the second book. This focuses, in case you don't know, around the historical period where Henry VIII was the monarch. So we follow his adventures with his different wives, and this specifically is focused on the downfall of Anne Boleyn. And I really enjoyed the perspective that Mantel gives from Thomas Cromwell's point of view. The whole story is narrated from his perspective, which is a very clever and very original idea, but also his character typically was always portrayed in a negative light in most official historical records, and this gives a more sympathetic portrait of Cromwell, which I really, really enjoyed. I have to say there's still something about Mantel's writing style that kind of annoys me, and for that reason prevents me from giving it a full 5 stars. But I guess most people wouldn't necessarily have the same issue. If you're into historical fiction and interested in that period of English history, is absolutely masterful depiction of that historical period, and I would definitely highly recommend it. And I rated this 9 out of 10. And lastly, I have Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. And this follows 2 twins in their 50s who live with their elderly mother in a cottage in the English countryside, but sort of in the middle of nowhere. And they're really isolated from the rest of society. They really live at the margin of society. And they find themselves in very difficult situations where they're really struggling for money. They don't necessarily have access to the same things that we take for granted. One of them, for instance, can't really write and read. They don't have proper jobs. One of them doesn't have a mobile phone. It's that sort of really grim setting, but the sort of characters that are not necessarily often portrayed in books, if you like, this sort of rural poverty. And it's a really sad book, given the premise of the book and some of the things that happen in the book. But the writing was incredible. I really enjoyed the story, and I really enjoyed Fuller's prose was magnificent, in my opinion. I found it incredibly compelling how these characters were really fleshed out with all their flaws, and they're really frustrating characters to follow as well, because some of the choices they make are really stupid and you kind of want to shake them. But that's, to some extent, that's the whole point of the story, where you can see that people who live at the margin of society can really struggle to make some obvious choices and stand up for themselves and know what their rights are, and also at the same time being really proud and unwilling to accept help from other people, as well from the government that they always see with some degree of suspicion. So I don't really want to say much about the plot, because I think the less you know, the more enjoyable this is. But if you enjoy that sort of literary fiction, grim story with this sort of setting, I thought this was a really amazing read. And I ended up rating this 10 out of 10. I hope you guys like this video. Please give me a thumbs up. If you want to talk about any of these books with me or our community, please join our Discord. The link is in the description box. And I'll see you the next time.